Time is running out. You notice that anyone in the world with even a little bit of money is racing against the clock to reposition their assets, because this time, it's probably the scariest financial doomsday ever. Some people still don't get it. The once unbeatable blue chip stock you could buy with your eyes closed and still make money, Nvidia, it recently plummeted by as much as 20%. Elon Musk, Trump's biggest ally during last year's election, his Tesla stock fluctuated wildly this year too. At its worst, it dropped nearly 20%. Then there's Amazon, Meta, all the major US leaders you can name. They all plunged at least 15% recently. With losses like this, countless people are questioning their life choices. But what if this is only the beginning? Even though US stocks have rebounded somewhat, if they plunge again soon, it could just take one night. Countless leveraged investors worldwide would see their fortunes wiped out instantly. Those people would be forced to sell off more assets to cash out for emergencies, and global assets would crash even harder. At that point, it won't be a plunge, it will be a total collapse. It happened in 2000, it happened in 2008, it happened in 2020. And these assets collapse? They're actually not the worst part. Because the truly terrifying part is that all these outcomes are exactly what the US government wants right now. And they're pushing for it, getting America into a recession. Why? Because only a recession can force the entire world to foot America's bill. What does this mean? Hello everyone, I'm Money Zen. You'll notice that the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the official agency responsible for employment statistics, originally reported August's non-farm payroll growth as a solid positive figure, adding 22,000 new jobs. But recently, they revised it down to negative 26,000, a negative figure. And this isn't the first time the BLS has downgraded data this year. In September, they slashed non-farm payrolls for the past year through March by 911,000, equivalent to losing 76,000 jobs per month over the past year. What does this mean? It's telling the world US employment is in trouble. In reality, the US economy isn't just in recession. It's worse than you imagine. That's why US stocks soared so high before. And now, they're crashing just as hard. Such bearish talk about a nation could land you in jail in some places, but you'll see. The US government itself releases economic data that keeps telling you the economy isn't doing well. A recession might be coming. So lately, I've been like those old stock traders from decades ago, glued to the TV watching Trump, wondering what he'll do to save the market. After all, 4 to 5 years ago, during his first term, the moment the stock market showed the slightest sign of trouble, he'd immediately tweet to save the market, even push the Fed to engage in QE. So the rise of US stock was his political achievement he talked about all day, but not this time. He hasn't uttered a single word. Why? Just as I was about to turn off the TV, his Treasury Secretary comes out and says, the government's top priority is ensuring long-term bond yields don't rise. Simply put, they need to make sure long-term US Treasuries keep selling. What does this mean? Then, look at this chart. This chart shows how much cash our great Federal Reserve has in its wallet. It's obvious that since 2022, that wallet has been shrinking. So what to do? The Fed goes to the wealthy tycoons, big players, financial institutions, and says, I'll pledge my treasuries as collateral, lend me the money. This is called a reverse repurchase agreement. Simply put, this reverse repo is the Fed's ability to borrow money from its own people. This chart shows how much money the Fed has borrowed back through reverse repos. The higher the blue line rises, the more treasuries the Fed has pledged as collateral, and the more money it has borrowed back, meaning the Fed's borrowing power is stronger. And the opposite? That's the situation we're seeing now. Back in September, that blue line practically hit zero, meaning the Fed couldn't even borrow money from its own people anymore. Only two possibilities exist. First, those financial institutions genuinely ran out of cash. If I'm broke, how can I lend you money? Second, even if I have cash, I'd rather hold it than accept the treasuries the Fed offers as collateral. So who's buying US Treasuries now? The Fed's wallet is nearly empty, and they can't even borrow money back. And what about those big players, those financial institutions? They are either broke, or if they have cash, they don't want US Treasuries. Then China, Japan, and those countries have been dumping US Treasuries again in recent years. In other words, US Treasuries are now facing liquidity depletion, meaning it can't flow freely in the market anymore. Why can't it flow? Because more and more people are selling while fewer are buying. That's why Trump's money guy said their top task is ensuring long-term treasuries sell. The solution is simple. Make America great again. Like laying off government workers, big companies cutting jobs, more unemployment, add tariffs for high inflation. The most important is to sanction the entire world, actively trigger a stock crash or financial crisis, even economic recession. Suppress first, then boom. How else can America be great again? But for us, remember, never waste a good crisis. When most countries can't escape, then the money will flow to Noah's Ark, which is the safe haven assets we position in advance. At that moment, we won't just dodge the crisis, we'll even spawn a bunch of new rich people. If you don't want to be a victim this time, or even wants to climb to a higher class, then you could subscribe to my channel because I'm going to be giving you more information like this. And if you're worried you'll forget everything after hearing it, and you don't want to waste your time, you can like this video. And it will be automatically saved in your playlist, so you can come back and follow it anytime. First, why is the US Treasury facing liquidity depletion? Doesn't the US just print money to pay off its debts? Simple, because the dollars can get back. What does this mean? Listen up. US Treasuries are actually a cycle of print money. Spend it, get it back, print more. Like before, Fed prints $5 trillion. Use that $5 trillion to buy US Treasuries and lend it to the US government. So the government owes the Fed $5 trillion, right? And the US government takes that $5 trillion to buy goods and import products from around the world, right? Then once the US government spends that $5 trillion, doesn't it run out of money? What to do then? Capitalists invented this method. The US spends $5 trillion globally, right? Then I just need to collect $4 trillion of that $5 trillion I spent. Wouldn't that leave only $1 trillion left globally? Wouldn't there be a shortage of money? And when the world runs out of money, wouldn't they have to keep selling me goods to earn my dollars? At that point, couldn't I just keep printing money to buy up everything in the world? So how exactly do I reclaim the money I spent globally? Simple. I just borrow it back from them. Sell them US Treasury and tell them, lend the money to America. Once we profit, we'll repay you with principal and interest. It's like you sell goods to me and take my money, then invest that money in America. We Americans will work for you and repay you. So the result is that the whole world takes a portion of the money they earn back to buy US Treasuries. In other words, the Fed printed $5 trillion, then the US government spent $5 trillion. Then by selling US Treasuries, they recouped $4 trillion. This way, when the world runs out of dollars, the Federal Reserve can just print another $5 trillion, lend it to the US government again. The government spends it, then sells treasuries to get it back. Then it can print more money. Got it? In other words, US Treasuries are America's method for reclaiming the world's money. The goal is to keep doing nothing, effortlessly buying up everything the world produces simply by printing money. So even if the US government now owes 38 trillion or even 100 trillion or 1 quadrillion, it's no big deal. As long as about 40% of what it owes is money other countries have lent to the US. Simply put, as long as it can borrow the money it prints and the money it spends back from the world, creating a global shortage of dollars and keeping the world wanting to use dollars to earn dollars, it can keep printing money to lend to itself. No big deal. In other words, as long as the world keeps lending back the money it earns to the US can keep printing money, and theoretically, as long as it can collect the money back, US debt doesn't need to be repaid because it can borrow new long-term debt to pay off old short-term debt. It's simple. For example, say today the US owes Japan $1 trillion in debt. That $1 trillion matures today and needs to be repaid. Then I'll ask you, will you keep lending me this trillion? And I'll keep paying you interest. If Japan keeps lending me, it's like I don't have to pay it back. If you won't lend, then I'll borrow $1 trillion in long-term debt from the UK. First, I'll pay you back this trillion. Then, after 30 years, I'll figure out how to repay the UK. This is what they call buying time to create space. Put simply, it's stalling, using time to dissolve the debt that must be repaid now. So this world isn't the black and white place taught in schools. Turns out you can delay repaying debts or even have others pay them off for you. But if every country in the world sells goods to the US, earns dollars, and then doesn't use those dollars to buy US debt, and don't lend that money back to the US, the money the US spends can't be reclaimed. At that point, they can't print more money. If they can't print money, they have to work and produce to pay it back. This is the liquidity depletion of the US Treasury. And that's exactly what's happening now. In the past, 40 to 50% of the money the US owed was borrowed back from other countries. But now, only 20–30% of America's current debt comes from other nations lending to it. In other words, the money it spends now can't be repaid. Unrepayable debt means the world isn't short on dollars. If it keeps expanding its balance sheet and printing money now, the dollar will instantly devalue wildly. The world would abandon the dollar even more and stop buying US Treasuries. Then, the money would become even harder to collect. So what can be done? Some people say. Recently, Trump has been working hard to find ways to make money to pay off US debt, like slap tariffs and even selling citizenship. As long as you can afford $5 million, you can become an American citizen and immigrate to the US right now, right? That's what you call making a global joke. As mentioned earlier, the money the US owes doesn't need to be repaid. It can't be repaid. If you repay this debt, the entire world would collapse immediately. Why? Simply put, today, Trump has managed to bring this money back from around the world. Global funds have indeed been drawn back to the US, but when Trump uses that money to repay US debt, it's sent right back out again. Moreover, America's biggest creditor, the Fed, originally printed money and lent it to the US. Now you are repaying that debt, which essentially means destroying the printed money and making it vanish. Why does America print money? Because earning money is too hard. That's why they print money. Sell US debt to collect it, then print more money. But now, not only are you not continuing to sell US debt, not only are you not reclaiming the money, you're actually repaying the debt. How can they print more money then? So the US doesn't need to repay the debt. Why would they? If you dare repay the debt, if you dare reduce the debt scale, then the US itself could collapse right before your eyes. Because it takes all the dollars it earns and uses them to repay debts or destroy them, then it won't have any money left, right? It's like, if I earn $1 million today, but I use that million to repay debts that didn't need to be repaid, I paid them off. So now I have no money left, right? When America runs out of money, it won't just be a matter of the stock market crashing. It'll be shutting down the entire Wall Street because everyone will be broke. I can't do business and you have no money to buy. So why bother doing business at all? Then the scene many people crave will unfold. Prime real estate in America might plummet to $100 per property because of deflation. But at that point, most people's net worth might also shrink to just $1, and no bank will lend you money to buy a house because nobody has any money. In other words, even though house prices get cheaper, wealth is relative. Most people will also become poorer. So you still think it's expensive and still can't afford it. So don't think that the US repaying its debt and triggering deflation is a good thing. It will only force America to sell off its assets at rock bottom prices, turning Americans into the poor. So everyone must understand, no US president has ever dared to repay America's actual debt. Repayment is just a slogan shouted for TV audiences. The real mission of the US government is to find ways to borrow even more money, collect it back, and then print more money. That is to expand the scale of debt. In other words, as US debt grows ever larger, money printing will only become more and more. When dollars proliferate endlessly, one currency inevitably lose value. Thus, money requires assets to underpin its worth. Otherwise, inflation spirals out of control. Because of this, asset prices will skyrocket. So, what advantage do we retail investors hold over giants like Buffett? We're simply more flexible. Buffett might buy or sell assets a year in advance. But us? We only need to wait until the capital is confirmed to flow in. We can enter the market the very second they're ready to push up the stock price. It's not too late. In other words, Big players create the trend, and we just follow it. Now listen carefully here. If you don't grasp this, you won't understand the crucial point later. That's why the US can't get its money back now, because the whole world refuses to lend to America. Can't get it back, can't print more money. So what do? Simple. We've all seen it. Over the past few years, the Fed raised borrowing rates. Before, if you lend me $1 million, I pay you back $10,000 in interest, right? So you weren't willing to lend to me. Now I'll pay you back $50,000. Let you earn more interest, right? Because of this, the US has reclaimed money from around the world. But the result is, most people only buy short-term US Treasuries, while long-term Treasuries remain unsold. Even worse, much of this money saw the US stock market rising and jumped in to catch the falling knife. In other words, the current outcome is that the US has reclaimed all the dollars from around the world. But the money isn't returning to the US government. It's flowing into the US stock market, straight into the hands of American capitalists. And as mentioned earlier, how does the US use treasury bonds? To collect money from the world without actually repaying it. It's simple. I borrow money from you and repay it in 30 years, then use that borrowed money to pay off maturing short-term debt. It's borrowing long-term debt to repay short-term debt. But what's happening now? Short-term debt has bias, so the US government keeps repaying it. But long-term debt? No one's buying it, no one wants to lend the US money for 30 years. This means the US government's scheme of borrowing long-term to repay short-term debt is unsustainable. When this game ends, it means the US must constantly repay its short-term high-interest loans to the world. For example, in 2025 alone, the US has about $8 trillion in debt maturing and needing repayment. So the US will have to use money from the Treasury to pay off these debts. But by July, the Treasury had only about $200 billion left. That's not even enough for regular expenses. No money to repay? Just print more to cover it. This brings us back to the initial point. If money is printed recklessly before it's even collected, it triggers instant currency devaluation. The dollar grows ever closer to worthless paper. So what's the solution? Here's the key. The US Treasury Secretary stated their top priority now is selling long-term bonds. What does this signify? I've emphasized this repeatedly before. Back then, everyone laughed at me for spreading panic. But now, just search online countless statements from Wall Street investment banks. Echo exactly what I said. Countless US traders are now preparing for a stock market crash. Why? Because if the US wants to keep printing money and avoid repaying debts, there's only one way. Shift the funds from US stocks into long-term treasury bonds. How do they do that? Why would the US Department of Labor voluntarily admit non-farm payrolls aren't as strong as reported? Why do all the economic indicators released now point to the US already being in recession? It's simple. For example, if you're running a business in the US right now, congratulations! After Trump imposed tariffs, your import costs skyrocketed overnight. You had no choice but to raise your prices, making your products unaffordable for many Americans. Your goods stopped selling. Unsold goods mean bankruptcy, but you survived, you didn't go under. Well, congratulations, because after Trump drove out the illegal immigrants, your cheap illegal immigrant labor force vanished overnight. You have no employees, so you have to start hiring Americans again, right? But then you discover your monthly payroll suddenly multiplies several times over. You managed to hold on through this too, because you are a government contractor making money off the government. No worries about losing orders, right? Then Trump tells you he's cutting $1 trillion from government spending. This time you finally can't hold on. So you jump ship and apply for government jobs, hoping to land a cushy civil service gig. Problem solved, right? But then Trump tells you we still need to cut costs, massively cutting hundreds of thousands of civil service jobs. So you end up interviewing at big corporations, only to find Amazon, Meta, every major company you can name is also slashing jobs. Suddenly, all you social elites are unemployed. What about your mortgages, your car loans? Unemployed and broke, how can you possibly spend money? Credit card defaults in the US have already skyrocketed to 2008 levels. So you'll notice Trump keeps saying he wants to make America great again, But every move he makes pushes the country towards recession. Why? Simple. By manipulating this American recession narrative, constantly shouting that America is heading for a recession, telling you that even the world's most powerful country, the United States, is facing an economic downturn. Therefore, no investment holds any value. Whatever you invest in will lose money. So when risks are this high, and the US Treasury bonds offer such high interest rates, stable and reliable returns, shouldn't you rush to shift your money into US Treasuries? And you absolutely must buy long-term Treasuries, because current yields are around 4%. Buying long-term Treasuries now locks in that rate for 30 years. If you don't buy now, when everyone else rushes in, you won't get such high yields, and long-term bond prices will rise. Buying later will cost you more and yield less. That's why so many people are being driven to scramble for long-term Treasuries. Now, here's the crucial part. This will lead to 3 possible outcomes. First, the most ideal scenario. US Treasuries sell out and the stock market doesn't crash. Then everything's fine. But US Treasuries and stocks are like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other goes down. If money floods into Treasuries, then the stock market runs out of cash. Currently, the US Treasury faces a significant funding shortfall. To ensure both stocks and bonds have sufficient money, the stock market will need to decline gradually over an extended period, while continuous capital inflows are required to support US equities. This scenario is relatively unlikely. The second outcome, which appears more probable, is what we often refer to. The US Treasury market is rescued as many investors step in to buy long-term treasuries. But the stock market crashes, and it would happen rapidly, much like in 2000, 2008, and 2020. At that point, the money invested in US Treasuries would be withdrawn. This would allow the Federal Reserve to seamlessly expand its balance sheet and print money. Then, it could lend this money at zero cost to capitalists, enabling them to buy US stocks at rock-bottom prices and push US stock prices back up. This is precisely why Buffett and we are holding massive amounts of cash. Because regardless of the first or second scenario, the US stock market must crash. But the final possibility is this. The US stock market crashes, yet the money doesn't flow into US Treasuries. The bonds market crashes too. At that point, the US truly enters recession, and this period will be prolonged. Because unsold treasuries mean unrecovered funds, and unrecovered funds prevent balance sheet expansion and money printing to rescue the economy. If they force a rescue, even if stocks rebound, it won't matter because the dollar will plummet back down. For example, if you buy US stocks that rise 30%, but the dollar depreciates 40%, you'll still end up losing 10%. This scenario would have massive repercussions because the entire world still holds astronomical amounts of US dollars. If dollar-denominated assets depreciate sharply, the entire world will plunge into recession, triggering a global financial crisis. So, why did Trump deliberately pursue so many policies detrimental to the US economy? He was essentially holding a knife to the world's throat, warning, if you buy US Treasuries, you'll be fine. But if you refuse to buy them, when America falters, you'll be the ones left holding the bag. So what happens when a global financial crisis erupts? The first country, the rest of the world, will rush to rescue. Isn't itself? It's the US. Take the 2008 financial crisis. It originated in America and rippled across the globe. Yet the first and the fastest to recover economically was still the US. But remember this, the greater the crisis, the more money we can make, and the faster we can make it, faster than any period in history. At this point, some might say, I'm just talking after the fact. Honestly, I don't blame these people. They're probably new to this too, but at least watch my previous videos first. I'm not trying to prove anything to them, nor am I showing off. I simply want to remind everyone of the current risks and what we merchants and investors see. I hope to use my small bit of influence to help brothers and sisters who are meant to hear this avoid this crisis. At the same time, I want to tell you that back in 2008, many people were just construction workers or wait staff at hot pot restaurants, but many of them are now the wealthiest seniors around me. Then, after 2008, class divisions solidified. Those who used to serve food now don't have to lift a finger. Their assets earn them every month, even every hour, more money than most people make in a lifetime. I was born later, still a kid back then, and missed that chance. But now this opportunity has arrived, and I've grown up. Most importantly, if it truly comes, I've got my ammunition ready. I've rolled up my sleeves. And even if this chance doesn't materialize, I've got nothing to lose, right? I'll just liquidate and reposition. So for now, we'll focus more on US Treasuries. But this isn't positioning we won't hold long term, just short term speculation. Because remember, if the US Treasury gets bailed out, they can keep printing money and the treasuries will surge even higher. But what if they can't be saved? That's why we'll move in and out quickly, make our money in the run. It's guerrilla warfare. Alright, if there were any details in today's video that were a bit hard to follow, leave a comment down below. And recently, things have taken a bit of a turbulent turn. But due to time constraints, I have to end here. But what do you anticipate in the next episode? A lot of people are waiting for this line every week. Alright, I'll continue sharing tips on how to become wealthy, how to be an entrepreneur, an investor, and achieving financial freedom every Sunday at 8:30. If you don't want to miss out, make sure to subscribe to my channel and click the little bell and generously share this video. I sincerely wish all of you who like this video will reach financial freedom soon. As long as you can find 1 or 2 useful sentences in today's content that can help you live a better life, I'll be completely satisfied. Alright, I'll see you next week. Bye.